Trump administration only pushed to release those documents as a form of diversion. Like, oh, we're doing something, but we're not doing something. And that's what we said, right? We told you guys that that's exactly what was happening. Is Trump just terrified for his life? Did he have no idea what he was getting into when he decided he wanted to be the president of the United States?
So recently, Candace Owens blasted President Trump for continuing to conceal the truth regarding Jeffrey Epstein, despite all the pushback against him, including some of that coming from his own base. Now, she gets into some of the elements of Epstein's past and how some of those circumstances might yield some clues as to what Trump and the deep state is hiding about Epstein and why they cannot divulge the truth to us peasants. So let's get her take on that. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
We have no idea. A little bit more regarding Les Wexner. Like Jeffrey Epstein, his rise also shrouded in mystery, financial mystery, a few untimely deaths. In fact, there was this journalist, Robert Fitrakis, who was investigating Wexner, and he explained, quote, "When I reported on his connection with Jeffrey Epstein in the late 1990s, I received a letter from a certain skyhawk who simply wrote, Jeffrey Epstein equals toe tag." Toe tag. Put it on your toe. When you're dead, you will die if you investigate Jeffrey Epstein. The Les Wexner story is one that we've heard before, especially if you're in my book club and we start talking about like the weird stories everybody tells. It's like they establish a myth about themselves. On the East Coast, I would say the myth is always that you get this businessman that says, I just borrowed a couple of $1,000 from my dad or my aunt, and then I tripped and I fell into $1 billion empire. And that really is the story of Les Wexner. He borrowed $5,000 from his aunt, tripped and fell into a fashion empire. I'm not kidding. He was born on September 8th, 1937 in Dayton, Ohio. And this salesman, who apparently was running a small family clothing store, is said to have then built the limited brand, which then became L Brands, from just a tiny little store that he opened in 1963 with just $5,000 that he borrowed from his aunt. Okay, Les.
Yeah, to be clear, Les Wexner is one of the individuals that gave a lot of wealth to Jeffrey Epstein. He signed over power of attorney to him. And to provide clarity here, we don't know where all of Epstein's wealth came from, but certainly a considerable amount, several hundreds of millions of dollars in wealth, including money and property, including the most valuable private residency in Manhattan, came from Wexner. And it's still inexplicable. We can't still find out why exactly this happened, how Epstein grew so close to him, and why this is still shrouded in mystery. So that's why it's important to get to the bottom of it.
He obviously is best known for his provocative Victoria's Secret lingerie. And Epstein, we learned, used that lingerie brand to lure teenage girls. He was kind of falsely representing himself. He even kind of wanted to create this idea that they were somehow Victorian by falsely registering the company in London to match that Victorian era marketing after its 1982 acquisition from its founder, Roy Raymond.
Also note that Epstein pretended to be kind of a talent scout for Victoria's Secret because he was so close to Wexner, the CEO and founder of L Brands, which also involved Abercrombie and Fitch, etc. And when people complained about his acts toward these young girls, you know, people went up to Wexner and said, what's the deal with this Epstein guy? Not only is he an unknown commodity, you know, we've been working for you for tons of years, he's stalking, harassing, and maybe molesting these women. And Les Wexner is known to have frozen some of those people off. Daryl Cooper talked about that in his recent interview with Tucker Carlson. And again, there doesn't seem to be a good reason unless there was maybe blackmail or some intelligence connection through Wexner. Wexner himself, one of the biggest benefactors in the country of Zionist causes, pro-Israel causes. So there still is mystery surrounding this.
So they take this company from Roy Raymond, and then they mint it in London. Now, I should tell you something about Roy Raymond, the actual true founder of Victoria's Secret. Roy Raymond, was found suicided. He was off of the Golden Gate Bridge, in 1993. And before he died, he said something interesting about Les Wexner. He said, quote, "When I met him, it was like I met the devil. Again, we will not be able to ask him why he felt that way because then he died.
Dead man tells no tales whatsoever.
Off of the Golden Gate Bridge. And then Les Wexner, who he thought was the devil, took his company. Anyways, in 2008, another L Brands brand, which was known as La Senza, attracted a ton of attention because of its very odd advertising campaign, which featured the slogan, quote, "Why should only adults have all the fun?" Only adults? They shouldn't have all the fun. And what were they doing? They were promoting a line of lace thongs and bras for girls between the ages of 5 and 12. Another scandal that Leslie Wexner was involved in was when he was investigated by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security under...
Of course, both Epstein and Jean-Luc Brunel, who was also suicided, he also was in the orbit of this nonsense taking place. And again, the feds have never interviewed Wexner. To any of our knowledge, it's never been documented. They've never said that they've interviewed him. No transcript exists. No real investigation into his connection with Epstein and why he got so much of his money, despite scandals like this.
Human trafficking laws for its supplier of organic and fair trade cotton, which was coming from Burkina Faso. Now, to everyone's surprise, Les Wexner, who was known as a lifelong bachelor, suddenly decided to get married when he was 55 years old. Not your average story, obviously. People tend to get married before then, but it happens. You can find love late, okay? Not throwing any shade here. But he chose to marry, which people thought was curious, a 35-year-old woman who was named Abigail Koppel. Now, Abigail Koppel was the head of the North American office of the Israeli airline El Al, okay, which was involved in a ton of Mossad operations from its very inception in 1949. And a source that worked with Abigail Koppel at Davis, Polk, and Wardwell said that they thought that Abigail Koppel was, quote, completely asexual. There was nothing feminine about her. So we assumed Wexner was gay and was getting married just to appease his mother, end quote.
There also is rumors that went around L Brands and in the orbit of Les Wexner that alleged that the reason he was so close to Epstein was because Epstein was his lover. Actually, the government even asked Epstein about that in a tape deposition that later came out. Epstein invoked, the Fifth Amendment and said, "I'm not going to answer those questions." But that was a rumor that swirled around this. But, there's also potential evidence that he was blackmailed or maybe involved in some kind of money laundering plot because that was Epstein's expertise. It's something that's not often talked about regarding Epstein, but that is the case too.
A second source would claim that Abigail was a lesbian and that the couple just had a business relationship. That was reported, by the way, by Kirby Summers in his book, Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy. According to the Wall Street Journal, it was Jeffrey Epstein who, in January of 1993, allegedly wrote the prenup agreement between the two, between Les Wexner and Abigail Koppel. So he was very, very involved with Les Wexner. How involved? Well, under oath, he was asked, rather mysteriously, Jeffrey Epstein was asked whether or not he had a sexual relationship with Les Wexner, whether or not he was a bisexual. That's interesting. And the next part I'm going to read directly from Xavier Poussard's forthcoming book regarding the Epstein scandal. Xavier Poussard reports, quote, "Many in Manhattan and London speculated about a romantic affair between Jeffrey and Les when in July of 1991, Les Wexner signed a power of attorney giving Epstein the authority to hire people, write checks, buy and sell properties, and borrow money in his name. It's worth noting that Les Wexner's alleged homosexuality is essentially part of his defense today. He claims to have cut ties in 2007 and, in a half-hearted way, plays the part of being the abused lover of Jeffrey Epstein, who allegedly embezzled $46 million of his fortune over the years.
That's about the only comment we've ever gotten from Wexner regarding Epstein and the Epstein story, by the way, that Epstein took $46 million of his money at some point. But he's never answered any questions about why he gave Epstein so much money to just be his money manager. That was essentially Epstein's title, but there's no evidence that he ever invested any of Wexner's money. He did exercise some control over his brands and had power of attorney. He could take out loans in his name, etc. But there's not really good conclusive proof that Epstein was actually providing him a service of any kind. That might have been a cover the entire time for a blackmail operation, some sort of intelligence operation. And this is why questions still remain, that we need answers from Trump and other deep state officials that promised to give them to us, but never did, because it seems that's no longer a subject of interest. If you talk about it, you're not a true Trump supporter. It's a Democratic hoax. It's boring anyways. We've heard all the excuses. They won't give it to us.
That's at least according to a statement from the Wexner Foundation, which was published in the summer of 2019. And in addition to the lawsuits he faces for child sexual abuse that occurred at the Manhattan mansion under the premises liability, Wexner's name also resurfaced in a sexual abuse scandal at Ohio University, where Les Wexner was chairing the board of trustees as a major benefactor. A group of plaintiffs turned to federal agents to examine the nature of their relationship with Dr. Richard Strauss, a physician in the athletics department at the university who had abused at least 177 male student patients between 1978 and 1998. So yeah, it's interesting to consider Les Wexner as a piece of this equation. It's kind of the only non-excuse they give us for why Jeffrey Epstein really had any money, why he trusted Epstein so much that he handed over his keys. Look, what we can say is there was a lot happening in 1997, 1998.
Yeah, there was. There's no doubt about it. And that's only a partial sum of the money that Epstein supposedly had at one point. It was widely publicized that at one point he was a billionaire. Apparently, when he died, he only died with about $550 million. I say only, relatively, right? But at one point, he was reported to be a billionaire. But he only received that amount of money from Wexner, some amount of money from Bear Stearns, but it doesn't seem to be that he even made $1 million at Bear Stearns from the receipts that exist outside of maybe whatever shady business deals he did there. And also Leon Black gave him $158 million just to do his taxes. Apparently he was just a tax wizard and supposedly saved Leon Black over $1 trillion worth of or over $1 billion worth of taxes. That's hard for me to believe to begin with. But at the same time, all we know about the wealth that he's generated is something like $250 million. He also got properties from Wexner in regard to the Manhattan property I talked about earlier. Also, he had a property right next to Wexner's in Ohio, one of the biggest. I think Wexner still has the biggest residency in Ohio today. But again, he's not being questioned by the feds. There's no curiosity whatsoever. All the Trump administration cares about is these red herrings, like the grand jury testimony that we're never going to have answers to begin with. That's why they invoked that. It was, smoke and mirrors to direct ourselves away from Epstein's true connections and, his possible connections with intelligence services. And not even possible, he had them with Ehud Barak, with Robert Maxwell, with Adnan Khashoggi, with Douglas Leese, and all other figures in the intelligence apparatus of Israel and some in the United States.
You have the mega group being launched. You have Monica Lewinsky scandal happening that had broken in 1998, by the way. You have Jeffrey Epstein being handed the keys to the Wexner empire. And of course, in addition, there always has to be an untimely death. And there was an untimely death. A journalist named Danny Castellara, who happened to be investigating all of this. In fact, he said he was investigating, and I quote, an international cabal that involved a computer software, which was known as Inslaw, and the Iran-Contra affair. But before we could figure out what he was talking about, before he could hit publish on that investigation, Danny died of an accidental drowning.
To clarify, he actually didn't die of a drowning. His wrists were slit in a bathtub, and that's how he died. He bled out. Now, the circumstances of his death are mysterious. There was a suicide note in his handwriting, but he called what he was investigating the octopus, and that was this kind of web of nefarious affairs in the elite circles regarding Inslaw and Iran-Contra. He thought it would blow the roof off the deep state, essentially. But there are circumstances pointing to, a foul play because, the briefcase where he had all his files was taken and there wasn't really much evidence, according to his family, that he was going to commit suicide. Anyways, that's another rabbit hole. You can do, 10 YouTube videos on that story alone, but just wanted to correct that. I think he bled out because his wrists were split.
Again, timely. We're going to never know what he was speaking about, but there is probably a lot more I could tell you about that computer software program, and I will tell you about that. But it's a good place for us to stop today regarding Jeffrey Epstein because it is just shocking. It makes you go, okay. Okay. Are we being a little too harsh on President Trump by demanding the Epstein files?
I don't think harsh enough. Not enough clamor. Needs more clamor over this. This is the hill.
For those of us who aren't even certain whether or not Epstein is dead, and the more you learn about the Epstein scandal and what we know about Bibi Netanyahu and what he's doing and feeling nothing to Palestinian, is Trump just terrified for his life? Did he have no idea what he was getting into when he decided he wanted to be the president of the United States? Did he have no idea? Was there no warning given to him by Bill Clinton like, hey, I'm not so sure you have any power and you better be very careful as to what interns are being hired and what their connections are? Did Donald Trump make the mistake that all of us made growing up, believing that we lived in a republic, a democracy?
I don't know. I can't say whether Trump knew what he was getting into, but he sure is acting in a manner that makes him complicit in this, or he would act in no different way if he was trying to conceal his own activities in it. And I think he would be acting the same way if he was trying to cover up for other high-ranking friends or officials in the Republican Party, maybe lobbyists, other connections he might have, but he sure is acting in a way that makes it look like he's involved to some extent. We know his name was in the Epstein files. I don't think that told us much that was new because he was the sitting president when this investigation began. Everyone knows about his friendship with Epstein. It seems to have ended in 2004, but there's no, proof it went beyond that, it sounds like. But he's responded in a way that only opens up these new suggestions about what could be happening. Is he being blackmailed by Israel because of the Israel connection, the connection he had to Israeli intelligence, etc.? We won't know, but we can't get those answers unless they come forward with the truth here.
Believing that we voted politicians that had real power, having no idea that there was this invisible hand that just keeps getting caught in blackmail scandals and then looking us in the face and being like, nope, nothing to see here. Keep moving, you little anti-Semite. You just keep on moving, you little anti-Semite.
That's not even hyperbole either. That is what, some of the Israel firsters have gone with when it comes to people still seeking answers on this.
By the way, as we predicted, Trump, they kind of made some noise and said, oh, we're going to demand, Pam Bondi, we're going to demand that New York unseals the grand jury testimony. We told you that that was obviously a nothing burger. The grand jury testimony in Ghislaine Maxwell's case, the federal judge has come out and said the same thing. He said, nope, this motion is an absolute nonsense. This motion to unseal the grand jury testimony from the criminal case pertaining to Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't know why Trump asked for this.
I do, because this is the ultimate red herring to say, hey, no, he actually, after pushback, was trying to get to the bottom of this, was seeking answers. But again, this was the diversion. This was a distraction. We know about what evidence exists. It's wire transfers of over $1 billion that Ron Wyden's talked about. And he's tried to get it subpoenaed and released so that we can see that. It has wire transfers from Epstein to people of prominence in over $1.5 billion of transfers. We won't get that. We have results from the search warrants. They haven't been fully described. We have knowledge of evidence that was withheld in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial that's been withheld. We have knowledge that Epstein was a federal informant in 2 different cases, one after Tower's financial Ponzi scheme that he was an informant on, and one after his first conviction in 2008 when he agreed to that sweetheart deal. Part of the documentation that still exists today says that he has to divulge information to the feds. It hasn't been made public whatsoever about what information he gave the feds. So again, we know that there's info. This grand jury thing, it was a distraction the whole time.
He wrote a 31-page opinion, the presiding judge in this matter, and he was pretty harsh about Trump. He basically said that even asking for this is completely ridiculous, that their reasoning for it is demonstrably false, and that Trump knew this. He knew that the transcripts would not reveal any new information of any consequence about Epstein and Maxwell's crimes. And he suggested that the Trump administration only push to release those documents as a form of diversion.
Yeah, well, I'm with him, and I don't care what political party that judge is part of or what political affinity has. That is what all Americans should be calling for right now. Release the files. Hold true to your word, but Trump won't do it. And that's why there's still continuing suspicions. That's why this will go down as a new JFK assassination. That we'll all be conspiracy theorists for talking about this despite their utter secrecy and clandestine attitude and dismissive attitude about it. But that's what's going to happen.
Like, oh, we're doing something, but we're not doing something. And that's what we said, right? We told you guys that that's exactly what was happening, that this entire premise was just to hope that we moved on from it. Again, I'll ask the question, do you think that we are being too harsh in this matter and that Trump is terrified? Looking at you guys, seeing what you think, I can tell you what I think. I think he is terrified. I think he's terrified for his life. I really do. I partially terrified for his life, and partially also, he's obviously his family is very involved. He's very involved with Bibi Netanyahu. And I don't think Jared Kushner is the kind of guy that's going to stand up to Bibi Netanyahu. He's working with Israel and their technology, if that's what we're calling it. I mean, with allies like these, who needs enemies, right?
Right.
Anyways, Thomas Massie is still pushing. He's been very brave. He's tweeted that he is going to be hosting a press conference at the Capitol. He's going to be joined by survivors of Epstein and Maxwell's abuse, several of whom are going to be speaking out for the very first time. He's saying that the survivors deserve justice and the Americans deserve transparency. And of course, he is correct. He's absolutely correct.
He absolutely is correct, as he almost always is. And hell, I'll say always, because Thomas Massie is the American Cincinnatus, a true hero amongst supervillains in Congress, surely so. So I support his and Ro Khanna's discharge petition attempt to actually get these files released. I don't think it's going to work. I think AIPAC and Mike Johnson and the Republican Congress is doing everything they can to whip votes against this. They want Trump to be able to handle this however he wants to protect himself and to be dismissive and evasive about this, as he always has been. But Candace said something about Trump being terrified for his life. Yeah, I think he is, and I'd be terrified for my life, to be fair, if a bullet came within 1 centimeter of being shot through my skull and killing me. And, you know, blackmail is a possible scenario here, that he's being blackmailed. He can't release this information because doing so would provide the Rosetta Stone of sorts that deciphers this twisted web of crime and complicity in Epstein's crimes, the child sex trafficking ring, blackmail operation, getting leverage over people of prominence in the political world, in the lobbying world, in the scientific world that he was involved in. Because you have this kind of information on people, you can bend them to your will. And if this was part of an intelligence operation by Israel, and that's where the indicators point in terms of circumstantial information and connections he had. I talked about it earlier. Ari Ben-Menashe, Robert Maxwell, he was the protege of. He had a very close friendship with Ehud Barak, the former not only prime minister of Israel, but also the head of IDF intelligence, that's military intelligence in Israel, and other connections he had, including 3 other Israeli prime ministers. So that's what we want to get to the bottom of. That's what the feds never talk about. You never hear this side of the story about Epstein or the information regarding his experiences as a money launderer. He was involved with people in arms trafficking deals like Lease and Khashoggi, and he played a role in offshoring money as part of Bear Stearns. That was his specialty, and that appears to be why he got into these intelligence circles. So the answers won't come. Trump's still being evasive, and Candace is exactly right. He's still concealing the truth. So even if Trump isn't involved in any crimes, it looks like he is, and it's only encouraging the suggestions that he is, and nothing he can do can get away from that. Even if he brings up Russiagate, which there were some interesting and I think valuable pieces of those documents that came out, it's setting up for another Epstein type situation if the people involved in Russiagate are not prosecuted. It's setting this up for another disappointment for his base. So his base is not going to like this, just like they don't like the Epstein story cover-up. And I do think it will impact Republicans in the midterm elections. Certainly so. And the polls seem to indicate that he is losing support over this. And it's not just dissidents that held their nose and voted for him. It's also part of his base. So, but I do want to hear from what you guys think. Let me know in the comments below. Is Candace Owens right about this? Why is Trump concealing the Epstein files? Why are they're doing all the diversions under the sun to get us away from this? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Candace. I appreciate her for this content. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel. And as thanks for that, I'll give you access to all my members only videos, the ones that you can watch before they go live to the general public on my channel. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. And in this case, no more cover-ups. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.